You're listening to the Sanditon Chronicles, where we talk all things Sanditon and Sanditon adjacent. Come along with us as we dissect all of your favorite characters, scenes, and dialogue. We have so much to tell you. Hey guys, welcome back to the Sanditon Chronicles. I'm Maureen.
I'm Janice.
And we are back, as promised, with another Samuel Colburn episode. And we are talking all of his relationships. So we're going to go through all the connections he's had with all the people in Sanditon, and even like with Charles Lockhart, what little he had with him in London. But we're going to be breaking those down as best as we can. Now, this is another character where we got more of him than we did of Agnes, because we got him from the onset, essentially, of season 3.
I think this episode 2 was, I think, when he arrived. But yes.
Yeah. But I feel like we were talking about this in the last podcast, where it feels like he's just always been there, right? It feels like he's such a prominent player. But when I was trying to like think about how his relationships with people in town, I started thinking, well, there's not a lot to go on. Like, we can see how he reacts to them, because he actually wasn't as big of a player as he is in my head on the show.
But he did have relationships and involvement with a lot of different players.
It did, yes. So it's going to be fun to break that down. We're going to save Lady Susan for last, because that's the person he had second to most contact with, right? The first, let's dig into him and his brother first.
Right.
We'll do bookends of his most important relationships.
It's the relationship we see first.
Yes. And that, I think that's a really interesting relationship. It was interesting to see how it played out. Like, when we first see them together, the first time we see them together, it's in London, correct? Like,
right.
My memory, okay. I get concerned that my memory is not accurate all the time. But that's first time we see him, it was so interesting how they played that off, because it was like they both were almost scared's not the right word.
Surprised to see each other. I think they were surprised to see each other. And I think that they, well, of course, Xander knew he was going there to find Samuel. And Samuel comes out of this building that could have been a courthouse. It's hard to tell. And he is just looking around. All of a sudden, he sees Alexander, and he is so surprised to see him.
Yes. And the expressions on their face, obviously Xander went there intentionally. Obviously Xander was aware, I'm going to find him at some point. I'm going to run into him. So there's that element where he knew, but there was still the expression on his face when they saw them. It was like almost like an "I have missed you" sort of expression on his face. It was melancholy. That's the word I'm looking for. They both had like this. Even Samuel, when they first showed his face, there was an instant of melancholy. I mean, he switched right on to Samuel after that, but they both had like this expression of that on their face when they saw them. And it as you watch the relationship play out throughout the season. We talked about this a little bit on our last episode, where Samuel, I think, felt this guilt for putting this on Xander. And so that's what he was responding to. But Xander, I think also, he could have really used his brother and all this stuff that has happened to him since he took over the house. And I think that him seeing Samuel, it was like almost like I'm mad because I needed you and you weren't there, but I need you and I'm going to trust you're going to come with me. So it was just this warring emotion in both of them when we first meet them. And I thought it was a really interesting way to introduce this character.
Yes, I agree. And I really think that you could see that Xander had just such focus on purpose. He knew why he was there. We can get reacquainted later. Come on, let's go. That's what the impression I got.
Yes, absolutely. And you could tell that Alexander did feel that way for him, because when Samuel said something to Xander throughout season 3, Xander listened. He might not have acted like he did when Samuel was saying it to him in the moment, like when he would talk to him about Charlotte. Xander would kind of talk it away. But Xander took everything Samuel said seriously, and he applied it. He used it. He put it into his life, because intrinsically, Samuel's a good guy. He's smart. He's objective. And he pays attention. And we honed in on that last episode. But I like that he could still trust his brother, even though his brother left, even though there's probably, you have to imagine, anger there that his brother left. In fact, he talked about that a little bit. But he trusted everything that Samuel said.
Right. But he was the owner of an estate.
Yeah.
He became the owner of an estate that normally the second son wouldn't.
Yeah.
And so there was some loss, but there was some gain as well.
A lot.
And he was, Xander was living in a place he wanted to live. He wasn't in London. So they were in appropriate places the way it played out. But yeah, there was some heartbreak along the way for sure. And growing pains.
Yes. And it was nice to see their dynamic restored. And honestly, the way when season 2 ended, I didn't think Xander and Samuel were going to have this kind of relationship in season 3 because of the very little that we got about him and what we heard. I felt like it was going to be way more strained and that Alexander was going to hold way more of a grudge. But of course, we can also say, well, he left Hayrick Park for the first time at the end of season 2. He came back a changed man, so that could have something to do with it. But I was happily surprised to see how good this relationship was in season 3.
I agree. And also he had a purpose in having Samuel help him. So, I mean, he had a source and obviously was very convincing about helping Georgiana, which was really neat. And then it was so great. And maybe part of Xander's underlying thought was, I'll bring him home and he'll get to meet the girls and the girls get to meet them. And that was a really positive part of the relationship between Samuel and the rest of the Colburn family. And, I think as you get older, you have more perspective about what family means.
Yeah, for sure. And I think part of me at first thought that maybe because he could have asked him back at any time, right? It's whether or not he kept tabs on him so he knew where to find him, or when he got to London, figured out where he was. Either way, it's clear that Alexander could have gone to get Samuel at any point in time and ask him to come home, ask him to do whatever. But at first, I was just going by the look on Xander's face. I almost thought, I wonder if he was excited to have an excuse to invite him back because he was worried that he wouldn't come back if Xander just said, come back for me, come back and meet my kids.
Yeah, that's a good thought. Yeah.
And it played out so beautifully. So when he came back to do this case, because Xander asked him, Samuel didn't know Georgiana. He didn't know any of these people. He came back. So part of me felt like Xander was asking him because, well, I have to have a reason to ask him back. I can't just ask him back just for me. But then Samuel was also saying, well, he asked me, so I'm going to go because he's the one who asked me. So it was just this beautiful meshing of their worlds. And I can see Samuel staying there because I felt like he bonded with Xander in a new way.
Right.
Of course, we don't see the old way, but.
And we just assume what it was like. But it was funny that, I mean, as the things went along and they were kind of teasing each other and talking about their emotional states and their relationships with each other, some, but with other people as well. There was some humor that came into it. And one of my favorite scenes is when Samuel, and I may not get the words all right, but when Samuel's saying to Xander that you're just denying this love you have for this woman, and he's just trying to avoid it, and he says something, I wish I could remember the exact line, but it's something along the lines that we're really good at avoidance, you're just avoiding it. And he says, isn't that on the family crest? Or it's on the Colburn family crest, the avoidance. Anyway, he's a slightly different term, but that was the meaning of it. I remember
that scene. That was a really good scene.
Yeah, I love that scene.
And Alexander needs Samuel to lighten him. I mean, Charlotte can do that, but Samuel does it in a whole different way because he's known him his entire life. So you have more access to who he was versus who he is now. But even that scene at the window when it's Leo and Samuel and Alexander and Augusta standing outside and they're watching her.
Right.
Of course, it's Leo's line that I love the most in there, where she says, it seems like a ghastly or beastly business. But
that I'll never fall in love. Yes. It's a beastly business.
Yes. And when Samuel and Alexander are responding to her, Samuel, the look on his face is so affectionate and so tolerant of not just Leo, but also Xander's response. And I'm going to paraphrase here because I don't remember the exact words, but he said something along the lines of, I hope you never do, Leo.
Yeah. I hope you can avoid it. Yeah.
And Samuel just kind of looked at him out of that corner of the eye thing and smiled at him. He just knew. And he knew that he didn't have to push Xander. And that was what's great about Samuel's character with these relationships. In none of them, other than Lady Susan, and even that, I wouldn't say he pushed her, but he knew when to hold back. He knew just to give a little nudge in all these areas. Whenever he talked to Xander about Charlotte, it was never like, hey, you dummy, go get her. What are you doing? He spoke to Alexander in the way that he needed to be spoken to.
Right. Well, let's face it, it's a period piece. They would never have used that kind of language.
Well, no, I know, but I mean,
but
the Regency version of that.
Right. I understand what you're saying. Then I'm thinking, I mean, Chris, we love the relationship that Samuel had with him, and ultimately he brought the news to Xander that Miss Haywood was not going to be married to this other person. So that was awesome. And also he was right with him, you know, not only to help with Georgiana and to help with, but when they ran off to check and see if Augusta was at the estate or if she'd already left, you know, he's right side by side with his brother, which is just awesome to see.
Yes, I agree completely. And it bleeds over into how he is with Augusta and Leo. He had a unique relationship with them. It was sweet. It was loving. It was caring and compassionate. And I mean, obviously in that time, girls needed a mom, right? Boys needed a dad. That's how it worked. And in a roundabout way, this is going to sound weird. And this is why I'm like stalling how I'm saying it, because I know when it comes out of my mouth, it's going to sound weird. But it was like they had a father-mother household when Samuel got there, because he brought the levity, he brought the compassion, he brought the I'm going to sit on the floor with you and do things with you because I care about you. Where Alexander brought the I'm the disciplinarian, I'm going to do this, I need to run this household this way. And so the girls, because of that, they even grew in that. And I think Leo became more herself. Augusta, although she made mistakes, she became more herself because of that relationship.
And Samuel was very understanding of where Augusta was. Oh, one other great line is when they're having that discussion and Xander's struggling with what to do with Augusta and especially when after they've brought her back and she's so distraught over finding out that Edward wasn't really who she thought he was. And he says I was more often the source of that kind of pain than an answer to that kind of pain. So I don't know what to tell you, you know. That was a good and funny line. You know, you can imagine he was a little bit of a
heartbreaker
ladies man, a heartbreaker especially when he was younger. And even then, now I suppose to some extent he could have been,
especially because in the last 10 years he wasn't a second son, but he had held the position of a second son where he had to work for a living. So he couldn't have. There were women who probably didn't take him so seriously because he was a lawyer. I mean, he's a catch to some people, but you have to imagine he was running with higher circles.
And also, obviously he was very comfortable in the bars and gambling houses.
Yes, he was.
We found that out from the trial.
But I try to block that stuff out, Janice. He's perfect, remember?
Well, I like well-rounded characters.
Yes, and he is that.
More real human beings. And the playfulness he had with Leo was just awesome, that he, when they did the little sketch to try and distract Augusta, that was so much fun.
Yeah,
it was
absolutely.
They really got into it, which was, it was really fun. Well, I want to go back to Georgiana. We kind of went past her because she's the second really relationship that he builds. When first of all, and we talked about this a little bit before, when he met with her and sort of ran her through what it would be like to be in the trial, so that, he was pretty harsh on her, but no more harsh than that. What was coming. Yeah. And then she was hesitant, but eventually after the concert decided to go with him, accept him as her,
Counsel.
attorney,
Mhm.
right? Her defender, as it were, in the courtroom. And he was just, so great with her when they tried to get her to be paid off. And, they were just so conniving, and he was caring and gentle the whole time.
Yeah. And like you said, we did talk about this a little bit last week, but in that scene where he's talking to Georgiana, when he was in that room with her and he got down on he knelt down on the carpet while she was sitting on the couch, and what he was saying to her was, it was so kind, it was so gentle, but it was also, there was no judgment from him, essentially saying, this is what you're going to get from them, and worse. I am not angry or upset if you say you cannot go through with this. I understand why you wouldn't be able to go through that. But if you do, you need to be sure that you can handle it, because
Prepared.
it'll be worse.
And he was talking to her also about that she would be judged not just on her words, but on her actions and her reactions.
Yes.
When they're sitting there listening to the testimony, she needed to have control of herself, which a lot of people don't,
Yeah.
So
that scene that you were talking about with him, I mean, I love, that's one of my favorite scenes with him and Georgiana, but it's that scene where when they won and he grabbed her hand, like that was just the epitome of what his relationship with Georgiana was. He was like an anchor for her during that trial. He held her firm, and he kept her safe, and he kept her solidly footed. And that was such a beautiful moment that he felt like he could just reach over and grab her hand and say, we did a good job.
Right. And backing up right before that is, the night before, when he's going through all this doubt about himself and if he's going to be able to pull this off, and admitting to Mary and Charlotte about really the kind of attorney he's been of late, and that he had not done anything this significant. He understood the significance of it. At least Georgiana wasn't in the room to hear that. That was good that he brought that up then. And, he was like, why was this so important to Xander that this happened? And of course, we know it's all because of Charlotte. But, and then Charlotte, who was not about to be pinned down about that, said, well, all that's important is that we win, that she wins, that we help her win. And she brought him right back to focus. And he recognizes that later when he talks to Xander about the kind of woman that Charlotte is, which is, again, we talked last night about how observant he is. But I'm just thankful that Georgiana wasn't in the room when he was having that conversation.
Yeah. And that was absolutely great foresight on his part it was by design, obviously, but to know, he wanted her to remain confident in him that he could do this. And the fact that he put so much time and so much energy into making this right. And of course, there's that scene on the steps with Lockhart's lawyer, where he was like, no, we're not going to bow to you. And so he showed strength.
How dare you, is what he said.
Exactly. He showed strength where he needed to show strength, and it encouraged Georgiana, and it's what caused her to continue to fight. It was his strength that he displayed to her.
Right.
He didn't display any weakness to her, no matter what he may have felt or what he showed to other people. He didn't show it to her at all.
Her only real period of doubt once they started going was when she was waiting for him to show up.
Yep.
And then she's like, has he abandoned me? And they were of course, Charlotte and Mary had heard how insecure he was. And so they couldn't say, oh, well, they were saying, well, he'll come here, he'll be here. And
blind faith.
Yeah. And then, of course, how awesome that he was able to go to that bar or gambling house or whatever it was and get the needed information.
Yep.
To prove how wrong the other attorney was about what was going on, what had happened.
Yeah. Absolutely. It was fun to watch them grow. It was fun to watch them encourage each other, because whether or not Georgiana realized it, I think that her faith in him did encourage him.
Right. Oh, yeah.
To continue fighting for her on behalf of her. And there were looks that he would give her during the trial when Lockhart's lawyer was coming at her about how her mother was worthless to her father, and all those horrible things this lawyer was saying to Georgiana. And she would look over to where Charlotte was sitting right behind Samuel, and the looks he would give her was just, it was so sure, it was certain. And it was, even though I imagine he wasn't, but he gave her these looks of certainty of, no, we know what's truth, don't back down. And there was I don't remember what exactly the other lawyer said. It was in the midst of all that. And I think it was right after he accused her father of not loving her mom, and right after she found out he sold her mom. And she had looked over there, and he kind of like stared at her straightly, and then she rounded up her shoulders and she sat up straighter after she looked over in his direction. And it was,
I think that's when she said, well, if that's true, I would be ashamed of him, if it was true. And it was a good way to put it. And yes, and I love what he did in the courtroom once he had more of the truth again, that reinforced what he already knew and believed, that he was magnificent at it. But what you were saying, I'm sure that is part of what attorneys are, actually pretty good actors.
Yes, they are.
They have to be. They have to show to their clients a strength and confidence they don't always feel, and they have to reassure them so that they won't cause themselves more trouble, you know, by falling apart or saying things they shouldn't or whatever.
Exactly.
So yeah, he was a good actor as an attorney.
Exactly. And first of all, we love Mrs. Wheatley. Like we've been talking about her since season 2. She was a character that we love. I'm not even sure if we did a spotlight on her in season 2, if I'm being honest. I think we talked about her when we talked about Georgiana, but I think this season we're going to give you a Mrs. Wheatley spotlight, because we didn't get a ton of her, but now we have 2 seasons that we can go through and we can kind of break down her character. So we know these boys have grown up with her, right? She has been in this house since she was 14. She is older than them. I don't think she's old enough to be their mother. I don't know. I don't know how old she is. How old would you say she is? I wish I knew how old she was. When was she 14? They didn't say.
Well, I'd say she's at least in her 40s.
Maybe old enough to be their mother.
Or not quite old enough, but getting there.
Yeah, maybe maybe they were born when she was like 15, 16, or maybe when she was first there. But either way, she has been there, if not all of their life, most of their life. So it was fun to watch Xander interact with her. But this season we got Samuel interacting with her. And there was this sort of tolerance she had of him. Like, tolerance is not the word I'm looking for. Like when someone is being crazy, or they're just rambunctious, and you're just kind of like, what is that called?
Understanding.
Maybe.
She understood who he was and what he was about. And I think that she really loved both of those boys.
Yes, she did.
And their family, and the girls. But I think that she was very concerned when Xander shut out Charlotte at the end of season 2.
Yeah.
And so her relationship with Samuel was, I'm sure she was so excited to see him come back, because it had been long enough. And it reminds you just of the relationship with a nanny, or that kind of indivial that helps raise the child. You could tell that she had.
Yeah, she loved them like a mother would. So you have to imagine that seeing Sam, not just seeing him back, but seeing their relationship restored after 10 years of silence, was because there were moments when she would watch them interact and she would just smile. Wouldn't say anything. In that scene, she wouldn't say anything. She would smile and then either watch them leave the room or she would leave the room. But there were those moments where they would give the actress cues where she would smile at them as they were interacting. And you could just tell that she felt like things were coming back together, like things were as they were supposed to be. And watching Samuel interact with her after the trial and ask her about her background, ask her about her parents, ask her about what her life was before, I felt like, I don't want to say she felt gratitude toward him, but I think she felt like they saw her for really what she was, that she's more than just the housekeeper. She's more than just the nanny. She's more than just the servant of that house.
Well, and he left at a time in his life where he was very self-focused.
And
And now
rambunctious,
he's
yeah.
come back when he's more mature, more observant of other people. And on top of that, now he's just gone through this trial with this Black woman, proving that she was deserving of the inheritance. I mean, that it was legal. And so, yeah, and I think that, especially from some of the conversations they had her have, that she felt like he was really bringing some life back into that
Yes.
home, you know.
Absolutely.
So he's the one who talked uh Xander into doing the hunting uh party.
Yeah. And with the other thing about that trial too with Mrs. Wheatley is that he just watched Georgiana, like he watched her mind when she was first told that her father sold her mother. It was the complete opposite narrative that she had of him, and it sort of broke her heart a little bit. And he watched that happen in real time. And I love that it made him think of Mrs. Wheatley, that he was actually, she was so top of mind for him. She was so naturally a part of his family that when he saw this young girl be hurt and upset by this, he wanted to ensure Mrs. Wheatley, that someone who he loved and has been a part of his life forever, how she was doing, how she came to be, what her situation was, because he cared about her well-being emotionally.
Right. And we don't know. I don't think they've ever said in any of the stories that we heard or the conversations how long the boy's mother was alive.
I wish I knew that.
We don't know that. Have to get hold of that background book that
I know
that Justin wrote.
Did he publish it?
No, it's not a book, but he gave a bunch of information. It sounded like a booklet. He wrote a whole background story, and maybe it was at least a few pages long for.
I need to get him to publish
Ben.
that somehow. Somehow.
I'm sure you can't talk to him either because of the writers. And
yeah, I don't think the writer strike is not the same as SAG, right? It's a different organization. I don't know. Britain and the US
they are different,
ones.
but it started with a writer strike.
Yeah.
Over the artificial intelligence.
Yeah. So those were the ones that were closest to home, quite literally, because they were in his home. But there's two more relationships we want to talk about tonight. One of them was Charlotte. And I love when he went back to tell Xander that, hey, she's not getting married. How excited he was to tell Xander about that, because I think Charlotte has a little bit of Sam in her, where she's got that lightness, she's got that jovial spirit. And obviously he knows that Xander needs that. And he knows that she would be the best partner for him because of that.
And it's clearly who he loves. He can't take his eyes off of her anytime she's in the room.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible.
And Charlotte encouraged him with Susan too. And that was so sweet. And that was so kind. That talk they had in the church where she was saying, well, how can she deny the king? She's letting him know that this is why she's leaving. You had to fight for her. You have to do that. She was doing for him the same thing that he was doing for her.
Right. The matchmaking, encouraging. Yeah, definitely. And that was the case.
I love that they shared that balance of personality. I love that they had that. I love that he could be silly with her, because the way Charlotte's personality is very much like his, where you don't have to talk to each other for years and years and years to feel like family. You don't have to talk for years and years and years to understand each other. She knew who he was. He knew who she was. And they connected like that. And I just love how they fought. Of course, hers was more, I'm fighting for my friend Susan to find happiness. And his was, I'm fighting for my brother. But still, there was a little bit where they wanted the other to be happy as well.
Well, and it's very clear that they alike in some ways, but she could support him with Lady Susan because she had come to respect him. He gained so much credit with her because of what he did for Georgiana, and how responsible he was in that situation. He wasn't a fly-by-night kind of person. And so he had gained her respect, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So it was easy for her to encourage her good friend along those lines, and to see how good he was for her.
Absolutely. And she knew that her friend would be safe with him.
Right.
and cared
Yeah.
for and loved, just
Right.
because that's who he was and that's what he did. And
Yeah.
so let's dig into her
Right.
friend and him. Let's dig into Susan and him. That first meeting between the two of them was so sweet, and it was so kind, and the way he just approached her unabashedly. Right, the first time they were introduced was at that concert, right? Am I
Yes.
remembering that wrong? Okay.
Yes, that's right.
And again,
And he kneeled down next to her.
Yep, I was going to say, again, he went down and lowered himself to have to almost look up to her. And for her to say, I'm sure you've heard the gossip. No, I don't pay any attention to the gossips and the things that are going on in town. I don't know what it is about you. I just know that I'm paraphrasing here, but I'm putting words in his mouth. He said, I think that you're just worth knowing.
Right. And he's like, I judge things for myself. I don't go by what everyone else says, which is what a sign of maturity that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really, really positive. And she's, like, yeah, right. She's a little, I'm not put off by him, but doubting, I would say.
I think she was doubting herself at that time.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Because look, the situation she was in, she thought the king was going to show up for this concert, and she'd promised her friend, not promised them, but, gave them some reason to believe that was the case. And especially Arthur. And then, aside from the fact that he put her aside, the king, that is, it put her in this awkward position with the people in Sanditon that she was friends with. So yeah, it was, she was not in a great place right then when they met.
And that didn't deter him. It almost endeared him to her.
Right.
Where he saw that she was broken, he saw that she was hurting, and he continued to seek her out. I mean, yes, she's beautiful, but I like to think that Samuel is more substantial than that. And I think he sought her out for more than just, ooh, she's pretty.
Well, if he was like that, he would have been one of the ones listening to rumors.
Exactly.
Well,
and he saw that she was worth attention. He saw that she was worth his time and his effort. And even though they started as friends, he still saw that she was worth his time.
Right. And really friendship was formed pretty much when they were at the hunting party. That's when they spent some time talking, and both agreed that they were going to try and get Xander and Charlotte together, that was the right thing to do.
And they both agreed.
Not that they wanted to interfere with people's lives. They make this one bet, just encourage.
Yes. And they knew that they loved each other. They knew that they wanted to be with each other. Oh, yeah. But that's also where they admitted that they were not about marriage.
Right. The friendship was fine, but, they were too old or too far in their lives to consider anything
foolish romantic notions. We don't need any of that nonsense. And of course, once they put that on there, that's when they really started to seek each other out, which obviously bred into they fell in love with each other.
Yeah, so that was pretty early on that happens. I mean, it's right after the court case is won, kind of right when they get back from that, and then it's after that they have well, of course, you see what happens with Augusta. I can't remember now if Lady Susan was involved in any of that. I guess not. She was.
What part of it?
Oh, just being aware of it. I don't think she was aware of that.
No.
That was very much separate. And then when Lady Susan is walking with, Charlotte, and the children come running up, again, he's not around, but that's ammunition or something for her to use when she talks to Samuel about the situation and how they want to really encourage them to get together. And so and of course, then what happens with Augusta running off is the two of them sit and commiserate. She goes to visit him at Highwick Park, knowing that his brother had left to try and rescue Augusta. And that is such a cool relationship we see there when they're eating food in the kitchen together. And then he ends up They're
Even
up
before
all
that, when they're
night.
talking in the office.
Right. Yeah. And then when they end up staying up all night, and she's the first person he's ever wanted to share the dawn with on the beach.
Oh man, he's got good words, that guy.
Yeah, definitely. And then she talks about leaving along in there, and he doesn't want her to, and so she ends up staying. Yeah, it's very romantic time.
Yep. And he found out, she had shared with him about what the story behind the carriage race on the beach, right? And so he arranges that for her.
Right. Oh, I left that part out. Yeah.
He
was
arranges for
thinking
her
of
to have.
leaving.
Yes. Go ahead.
Right. I spaced that out. Yeah. She was saying, well, if Charlotte's going to go back to Willingdon, there's no reason for her to remain here. And her, her friend was leaving. And that's why she came to Sanditon in the first place. And so then he, creates the buggy race, which is so fun.
And even when I love the reaction when they're doing it, and what did Lady Susan said, what, best 2 out of 3? That was what she said,
right after she said, well, just once and not too fast, and after all, I have to protect my dignity. And so she's leading to begin with, and then he catches up and goes by her, and that's when they come to us, how dare you beat me? And then best 2 out of 3. Yeah.
You see Charlotte and Xander's like this. He's very serious, right? He's very reserved. He smiles more in Charlotte's presence. She brings that out in him. But then you look at Samuel and Susan, and they aren't, one super serious and one not super serious. They're both very jovial. They both really love life. They both really want to enjoy things. They both really want to be able to smile throughout their life instead of having to look at all the dark things, the negative things, the hard things. They might realize that they're there, but they don't want to hone in on the bad. They don't want to sit there and fixate on it. They want to enjoy each other's presence.
True. But however, you do see the pain come out when she gets that summons to go back to the king.
Yeah, she loves Samuel at that point.
Oh yeah. But she, he starts to propose to her and she shuts it down.
Oh,
that was heartbreaking. And then she's like, no, she has to go, and she leaves. And the best thing ever is when she comes back.
Yes.
And the two of them, make sure that they, it's because of her conversation with Charlotte and then Susan's conversation with Samuel, that the news travels in the right place for them to know that Charlotte isn't marrying and Xander doesn't know it.
Yeah.
And Charlotte thinks that Xander's marrying Lydia. So they were instrumental. Samuel,
absolutely,
in that relationship, Samuel and Lady Susan.
Lazy Susan.
Last name is. Huh?
Lazy Susan.
Lady Susan. I didn't mean to say that if I did. Lady Susan.
You did for a second, then you corrected yourself.
A Freudian slip.
And I think too, with that, going back to that speech at the church where he is basically saying, defy the king, stay with me. I can make you happy. I can ensure that you're never going to be cast aside again. You're never going to be thrown to the back of the pack. I'm going to be here for you. Whether you make me excitingly happy every moment or not, I'm going to be here for you. That speech was so good. And you could tell her fear was overriding everything, and it broke her to say no to him. And I think it's interesting that where we see, that day that they had the first kiss in the kitchen of Hayrick Park, that's because Lady Susan goes there. And then when we see at the end, when she returns to him, it's her going back to him. And so it was a nice subtle way to show that she is still making decisions that are wholly her own. She's not being cowed by someone else to do this. But that scene where she returns to Hayrick Park and he's standing in front of the fireplace is one of my favorite Lady Susan and Samuel scenes. One of my favorites.
Yes. Yeah. And you can just imagine how those words of his that you were just discussing, as she leaves and is, I assume, in a carriage, moving away from Sanditon, and all those words are going through her head
Mm-hmm.
and coming back to her. And that's what caused her to turn around and come back to him. And thinking about what it would be like with the king and how long before he would discard her again.
Yep.
You know, how
That's
long?
one complaint I have about season 3 is that we got to see Georgiana and Otis married, which I'm so glad we got to see that. That's awesome. We got to see Xander and Charlotte married, which obviously had to happen. I was hoping to see in that montage, like all of our happy couples. If you're not going to continue, I wanted to see all of our couples that we know are endgame. I wanted to see them at the altar. And we didn't see Samuel and Susan at the altar. We saw them in the crowd sitting next to each other, but we didn't see them at the altar. I wish we could. I mean, we can imagine that. Obviously, we can create these things. We saw them at the wedding breakfast together with all those little kids running around. But I would have liked to see them at the altar, just to ensure in my head that, okay, yeah, they're good.
Well, the truth of the matter is we don't want it to end.
That's exactly it.
We want it to go on, but it's fiction and it does end.
Not in our heads, it doesn't. If the Sanditon sisterhood and the Sanditon fandom has proved anything, it's that we do not let things go.
Right. And, I was just thinking about the fact that we're continuing these podcasts, even though the show has ended. But then it occurs to me that the show hasn't ended in a lot of countries in the world right now.
That's right.
A lot of them are just now being able to see season 3.
Yeah.
And there's lots of people that are just learning about Sanditon.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, we've had a lot of people joining our Facebook group who have said, I just found this show. Like,
right.
I'm so happy for you. But boy, are you going to be sad in 9 episodes.
But then you can be happy again later.
See, though, if you are just finding this show and you are finding it in reruns, or you're finding it on Amazon Prime or Masterpiece PBS on Amazon Prime, you at least get the benefit of not ever realizing it was ever canceled. And you get to go from the end of season 1 right into season 2. So be very thankful that you did not find it when it was live viewing season 1. And when an entire multiple nations of people had a joint panic attack meltdown at the same time.
On the cliffside.
Mm-hmm. That was a hard 1.5 years while we just waited.
Right. Yeah.
But I think we've dug into all of his relationships. Let us know if you think that we're off on some of these things, or maybe you think that we've missed something, or we've missed a relationship. Let us know. Again, we don't mind if you guys disagree with us. We like it. We want to hear from you. We want to hear what you think, what you're saying. Check out our Facebook group, which is the Sanditon Chronicle Sanditon Family Fan Club. We have some things set up there where I'm trying to be more active in there. On our socials, I'm trying to be more active as well. If you are listening to this on Podbean, we do have, it's not Patreon. It's spelled differently than Patreon, but it's Patreon. So there's if you want to support us that way, you can do that on our Podbean or wherever you listen to it there. And then if you are listening to us on Spotify, we do that through a different platform, and we do have a Patreon for that as well. But if you're watching on YouTube, making sure that you are subscribing. If you are listening to this, please subscribe. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe. It just helps us to not just look, but be more credible when we start getting interviews on here for cast and crew members. And as we start to think about what the next content is going to be, the more we have, the more watchers we have, the more subscribers, the more content we are able to get for you. Also, check out our membership video. We've got a new membership program that you can do via YouTube if that's something you want to do. And again, remember, if you do not want to subscribe to memberships, totally fine. Nothing changes for you at all. This is still going to be exactly what it has been for the last 2 years for you if you don't sign up for memberships. So totally fine. But next week, I believe we are going to be talking about the Montroses next week. So stay tuned for that. I cannot wait to dig into them because they are so complex and so fun and equal parts scary and make me laugh.
Yeah.
So, I can't wait to dig into them. And that's what's coming up for you next. So we'll see you real soon. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Are you craving more TSC content? Head on over to our social media accounts. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and our Facebook group, the Sanditon Chronicles Sanditon Family Fan Club. Also, check out our website, thesanditonchronicles.com. Of course, we want to hear from you. We want to know what you want to hear and what your thoughts are. Email us at the.sanditonchronicles@gmail.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tune in every week for new episodes.